Wherever Rabbi say, in the zchus of these wonderful people who've made all these arrangements, we're zoicha to learn together Hilchos Shabbos. Vayakel Moshe is called Adas Bnei Yisrael. Parshas Vayakel starts off, Moshe Rabbeinu assembles Klal Yisrael. What for? What does it tell us? The first thing he tells us is Hilchos Shabbos. Says the Yalkut there, Vayakel Moshe was not by mistake and wasn't his own idea. Vayakel Moshe, Omar Kodesh Baruch Hu, Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, he should be makhil kehilois, he should gather Klal Yisrael together and make shiurim to learn Hilchos Shabbos. This is an instruction from HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself that we should learn Hilchos Shabbos together. And in this way we are zoicha to bracha. Every yochid can learn Hilchos Shabbos by himself. But Vayakel Moshe is the way Shabbos was given to us. The way Shabbos was given and the way we copy throughout the Doros is by shiurim on Hilchos Shabbos. That's the way we learn Hilchos Shabbos. That's the way we steig and we get to know the halachos properly. The Alshich says further on that pasuk, there was a kitruk on Klal Yisrael because previously in Kisisa, by the Maisa of the Egel, the pasuk says, Vayakhel ha'am al Aaron. They assembled around Aaron, and that was the beginning of the Maisa Egel. When there's a kitrug on a tzibur together, then the way out of it is Vayakhel Moshe, he made a shir, barabim, betzibur, and that's the tikkun. Klal Yisrael, as a unit, as a whole, is in desperate need of rachmim. We as a tzibur need rachamim. And the Alshich says that when you have a tzibur who needs rachamim, then the way is Vayakhel Moshe, make it tzibur, and the tzibur should learn together. And our thanks to those incredible individuals who spare no effort to arrange the shiurim and make sure exactly what each Magachi is going to say and not going to say to the maximum benefit of the participants in the shiurim. In the Zmiris on Shabbos, we say in Yom Shabboson, we say Diber b'kodshay b'har Meir, Yom Hashvi zocher v'shomer. We have to learn and keep Hilchos Shabbos. V'chol pikudov, and all the mitzvahs of Shabbos, yachad ligmoir, together we will learn them. That's the kiyum of zocher v'shomer, is yachad ligmoir, that we learn them together. This is the base of this wonderful opportunity of Yachad Ligmor, that was zeicha to learn the halachos of Shabbos together. In this week's parsha, the Shem Shmuel brings down, excuse me, I say over sometimes, from Gedolei HaChasidim. Shem Shmuel brings down, the pasuk says Zocher and Shomer, and Chazal say, Zocher and Shomer b'dibar echad namru. Hashem said them in one go. And from this we learn a din. Ostensibly, it should really be that Noshim, women, should be potter from the mitzvah say of Shabbos, of Kiddush, and Lechem Mishnah, and 3 Sudas, because it's a regular mitzvah say Shes Mangrov, like the potter from Tefillin, they should be potter from Zocher Yom Shabbos to catch. But because we know that Zocher v'Shomer b'dibar echad namru, so we know that when Hashem said Shomer is Yom Shabbos, it's a loisa say, keep the lamates malachos. Says the Gemara, Kol sheyeshnoi b'shomer es Yom Shabbos. Anyone who's included when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said Shomer es Yom Shabbos, Yeshnoi b'zocher es Yom Shabbos, is automatically also addressed when Hashem said Zocher. And because the women are included, are part and parcel of the instruction of Shomer, therefore they're also included in Zocher. That's the Gemara. Says the Shem Shmuel, this week's parsha, a tifur pshat in the Gemara. Zocher Yom Shabbos is a big madrega that a person should be zeicha to appreciate what Shabbos is, to spend his Shabbos correctly, to gain from the Kedusha of Shabbos, to carry the Kedusha of Shabbos into the whole week. That's a big madrega. Zocher Yom Shabbos, and not everyone is zeicha. It's very difficult to get to there. Say Chazal, the way towards gaining from the Shabbos, the way towards being spiritually uplifted on Shabbos, elevated from the Shabbos, is by keeping the Shabbos properly. If you're included and you take steps to ensure that you are included in the Shomer Yom Shabbos, because you learn and keep the Lamates Malachos properly. He gets a present from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You'll be included in my Zocher Yom Shabbos. We want to benefit, we want to derive benefit from Hashem's holy Shabbos and be included in His Shabbos. The way starts with Kol Sheyeshnoi B'Shomer Yom Shabbos. Yerushalmi says famously, an Amoretz who has little shaychus to Torah mitzvahs. During the week, he's not Naaman. He tells you something, he took Truma, he didn't take Truma, he's not Naaman. If I ask him on Shabbos, did you take Maisa, Maisa Rishon, Maisa Sheni, and he says yes, he's Naaman. I can believe him, I can trust him. Why? From Sunday to Friday, I won't rely on him. Says Yerushalmi, Afilu Amoretz, Eimas Shabbos Olav. He has a trepidation of Shabbos. He's scared of Shabbos. He wouldn't say a lie on Shabbos. Says the Shem Shmuel, also in this week's Parsha, Parsha's Chayesara. Chazal don't mean just that there's a person who's slated. We looked at his entire personality and we decided this guy is an Amoretz. And about him, Chazal said, Eimas Shabbos Olav. Says the Shem Shmuel, every single one of us is partially Tam Chochem, partially Amoretz. There's parts of us which like to do mitzvahs, and there's parts of us that find it difficult. There's times when the Yetzer HaTov is stronger, and there's challenges where the Yetzer Hara is stronger. Says the Yerushalmi, Afilu Amoretz, that part of the physique of a person, that part of the makeup of each person, which can be termed Amoretz, because that part of my character is still lacking and still finds it difficult to keep mitzvahs. That part in each one of us, Eimas Ha'aretz, Eimas Shabbos Olav. When it comes to Shabbos, we make sure to keep Shabbos properly, and we learn the Hilchos Shabbos, and in that way we are zeicha to elevate ourselves from the Shomer, called Sheyeshna B'Shomer, Yeshna B'Zocher Yom Shabbos. And when we get to this level of Shmiras Shabbos, which Be'ez Hashem, each and every one of the wonderful Mishtatfim who are learning in these Gewaltige Shiurim, each one becomes Sholem in its Shmiras Shabbos. Then we say in the Zmiras, Ki Eshmara Shabbos, Keil Yishmareni. We all need a Shmira. Personally, our families, our dear parents, we all need Shmira. And the key is Ki Eshmara Shabbos. If I look after the Shabbos, Keil Yishmareni, then Hashem will protect me. The Rambam says at the end of Hilchos Shabbos, Mitzvah Shabbos, there's a great tzcha in Olam Haba, for sure. But besides that, says the Rambam, the Novi promises us, V'his anag al Hashem, v'yitin lachom mishalois libecho. Says the Rambam, this is not talking about tzcha in Olam Haba. Besides the tzcha in Olam Haba, you will see in this world the tzcha for Shmiras Shabbos. Tis anag al Hashem, v'yitin lachom mishalois libecho, will give you whatever He will grant your wishes. That's a tzcha in Olam Hazeh. Big discussion in the Achronim, why it's not mentioned in the Mishnah of Peirasei B'Olam Hazeh. But the Rambam says explicitly at the end of the Shabbos, the tzcha of Shabbos, besides Olam Haba, you get tzcha in this world. The Tikkun Isaiah says on the pasuk, "V'shomer b'nei Yisrael es haShabbos, last haShabbos l'doiroisam." The word l'doiroisam literally is translated to all their generations. And it should be spelt with two extra vowels, ledoi, roi, som. But in the Sefer Torah, it's not written that way. It's lacking the vowels. Says the Tikkun Zohar, why is it missing the two vowels? To give an alternate reading of the word. Ledirosom, into their homes. We need Shemira in our homes. And every one of us needs Shemira in their homes. Says the Tikkun Zohar, V'shomer Yisrael, if you keep Shabbos properly, all the Lamates Malachas, you're careful what you do on Shabbos. Lasis is a Shabbos, L'Deirosom. The Shabbos will come L'Dirosam into every person's own house and protect him. Ki Eshmer Shabbos, Keil Yishmerini. And beyond that, the Pasuk says in Mishlei, Birkas Hashem, if you're Zoicha to get a bracha from Hashem, Hi Ta'ashir, it'll make you rich. What is the bracha of Hashem that makes riches? Says the Yerushalmi, Shabbos is Mekoyer HaBracha, as we say in the davening, Ki Hi Mekoyer HaBracha. If Shabbos is Mekoyer HaBracha, then on that Shlomo HaMelech says, Birkas Hashem. If you get the bracha of Hashem from Shabbos, which is the Mekoyer HaBracha, Hi Ta'ashir, then you get Ashiras. Proper keeping of Hilchos Shabbos is a skula for Ashiras. Says the Chasam Sofer, not only keeping Shabbos is a skula for Ashiras. Preparation for Shabbos is a skula for Ashiras. Kol ha-meshamer es ha-Shabbos, a person who waits for Shabbos and prepares for Shabbos, miloshen va'ovev shomar es hadavar, he gets the nachal bli mitzorim. The Ashiras comes already from the Achana for Shabbos. Says the Chasam Sofer, Achana for Shabbos doesn't only mean setting the table and buying food for Shabbos. Learning Hilchos Shabbos, which we are doing today, says the Chasam Sofer explicitly in Parashas Beshalach, brings Ashiras. That's the zechus of learning Hilchos Shabbos. Birkas Hashem Itashir starts now, starts when we learn Hilchos Shabbos. That's what brings the Shmira, and that's what brings the Ashiras. Says the Chasam Sofer. Of course, the individual person is Zocher to Parnasa and Ashiras in the zechus of the Shabbos, of learning Hilchos Shabbos. That's not enough. On every Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash, they changed the Lechem Aponim. The Lechem Aponim represents Hashem's bracha of Parnasa to the entire world. The entire world gets its bracha through the Beis HaMikdash. You change the Lechem Aponim on Shabbos to show that the Ashiras and the Parnasa of the whole world in the coming week comes through the Shabbos. So when you learn the halachos of Shabbos during the week, today, tomorrow, and the next day, and learning Hilchos Shabbos, says the Chasam Sofer, is included in Birkas Hashem Itashir, then it works not only for you and me that we should be Zocher to Parnasa, but it brings a skula of Parnasa to all Yidden who need Parnasa, like the Lechem Aponim brings in the zechus of Shabbos to all Yidden who need Parnasa. We're dealing with gold here. We have opportunities to learn Hilchos Shabbos together, which our wonderful friends in the Agudah Torah projects have arranged for us. Vayakil Moshe, they're copying Moshe Rabbeinu to prepare Kehilos, learning Hilchos Shabbos, like Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu. All we need to do is listen, take in, prepare the Hilchos Shabbos, and in that way we should be Zocher to a Shmira to each and every one of us, to our families, the Dirosam, and an Ashiras to us and the entire Klal Yisrael. We now have the zechus to delve into one of those very difficult malachas and try and understand the shittas of the Rishonim in the Leches Bishul on Shabbos. Bishul is one of the Lamates malachas and is learned from the Mishkan, where they had some umonim, the preparation for the dyes that they needed in the Mishkan, and these dyes had to be cooked up to draw out the dye. Cooking, Bishul, is one of the Lamates malachas. The Mishnah Berurah, we're coming shortly. It's now already mid-Cheshvan. In a month from now, just over, is going to be Chanukah. Today, most of us are Zocher, Mitzvah L'Mahadrin, Shemen Zayisach. But it's clear in the Poskim that throughout the generations, Not everyone was zeicha, not everyone could afford, not everyone could get hold of it. And a lot of people lit with candles, as we see in the poskim throughout the generations. Candles were made either of beeswax or tallow or other things. You made candles. And it was very nafutz, very widespread in those days, that the candle made of beeswax wasn't pure wax. There were other things mixed in. One of the things that was often mixed into candles was the cream of the milk. Today we get pasteurized milk, we don't even get the cream. But cream was part of the makeup of a candle. Today also, when you buy a candle, it's likely it's not going to be pure beeswax. It's got other things mixed in, for whatever the reasons why they mix it in today. In those days, they had candles which were made of beeswax and a certain percentage of cream. The Mishnah Berurah brings down in Siman Tov Reish Ayin Gimel about candles which are made of a combination of beeswax and a bit of cream of the milk. And that cream of the milk was made by a goy, and it was cooked previously with meat. So you have meat and cream together, and they have been manufactured as becoming part of my candle. May I use such a candle for lighting the menorah? That's the shayla which Guru brings down, a long pekel of the Achronim who discussed this shayla. The Sha'ar Ephraim, it goes back already 300 years, the Sha'ar Ephraim says, what should be the problem? I'm not eating. The Torah says, there's 3 surim in Basar. I'm not eating this candle. I'm having an off from it. I lit the menorah. And you're not allowed to have an off from Basar B'chalav. Says the Sha'ar Ephraim, what sort of anor am I having? Anor of reading by the candle, I'm not allowed to. Chanukah candles, the sum total of my anor from this candle is that I'm doing a mitzvah. And we have a rule in the Gemara, mitzvahs, lav la'ones ditnu. That's not considered to be anor. Or like Rav Shimon would say the Pshat in the Gemara, it's not considered to be taking or deriving the anor which the Torah forbade. So on the plane, on the line of Hanor from Basar B'chalav, there's no issa in lighting a Chanukah candle which is made of Basar B'chalav. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah Berurah, in the name of the Eliyah Rabbah and the Shmos Yankiv, you're not allowed to light such a candle on Chanukah. Why? I'm not having Hanor from it. Mitzvahs lav la'ones ditnu. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you're right. You're not having Hanor. But there's one of the 3 surim of Basar B'chalav is not allowed to cook them together. You take a pot, you put in it meat and milk, and you put it on the fire. That's Bishul. Says the Mishnah Berurah in the name of the Gdolei Achronim, this is called Bishul Basar B'chalav. You light the candle. It heats up the wax, the cream, the meat content. That all gets absorbed into the light of your Chanukah candle. That's called Bishul. That's the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Tov Reish Ayin. Now, we'll all appreciate that this looks different than normal Bishul. Normal Bishul is I have a pot full of cream and meat. You heat it up. You come away half an hour later with a bubbling pot of cream and meat. That's the way we understand Bishul Basar B'chalav. What the Mishnah Berurah is saying here in the name of the Achronim, and they say it without any doubt at all, that the Rabbah and the Shmos Yankiv, when you light the candle, it heats up the Basar B'chalav until it disappears from sight. It goes into the light, it's burnt up, and there's nothing left. If you heat up Basar B'chalav, you bubble it up to the stage that it disappears from the world, says the Mishnah Berurah, is also called Bishul. And therefore is forbidden Basar B'chalav. Very simple. The Achronim bring a riot to this chiddush of the Mishnah Berurah. The Gemara in Yevamos has a big discussion called Havara Lalav Yotzis. Havara Lalav Yotzis means that there's Lamates Malachos in the Torah, and besides the fact that the Torah says all the Lamates Malachos is a chiyuv of skila and chorus for all these Lamates Malachos, the Torah says another thing. There's a new lav in making a fire. And the Gemara in Yevamos discusses why did the Torah find it necessary to write explicitly a lav for havara for making a fire, if it's one of the Lamates Malachos anyway. Mavir is one of the Lamates Malachos. The Gemara brings Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Rabbi Yossi's opinion is, you're right, Mavir is one of the Lamates Malachos. And all the Lamates Malachos carry death penalty. And if there are no Eidim, then the fellow gets cursed. And if there was not amazing but a shoygin, then you bring a korban chatas for all the Lamates Malachos. The Torah wrote Le'savaru eish b'chol mishvasechem, not to make lighting the fire stricter, but in fact to make it more lenient. That what? If you make a fire on Shabbos, you only oivan alav. There's no chiyuv misa in Beis Din. There's no chorus in Shomayim, and there's no korban chatas if you did it b'shoygig. That's called in Gemara language, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Havara, the fact that the Torah wrote the Sevaru Eish, Lelav Yotzis. It's written specifically by itself in the Torah to downgrade it, to tell you it's only a lav and not like the rest of the Lamates Malachos, Misa and Chorus and Achatas. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Very good. The Gemara in Yevamos Daf Vav Amud Beis suggests that this could be the opinion not only of Rabbi Yossi, but also Rabbi Shmuel. The Gemara wants to pshat in a brayso, so it's not relevant to us now. That Rabbi Shmuel also holds Havara Lalav Yotzis. The Havara is only a lav and not a chiyuv of Misa, Chorus, and Chatas. That's the Gemara. Tosis on the spot asks a big question. How can the Gemara in Yevamos suggest that Rabbi Shmuel holds that Rabbi Yossi? That Rabbi Shmuel should hold that Havara is only a lav? Can't be. There's a very famous Gemara in Shabbos, in which Rabbi Shmuel says, the Chachamim said that you've got to be very careful that you don't read L'Oyer HaNeir on Shabbos. Don't read by candlelight, because maybe the candle will start to flicker and you'll turn the candle so that the oil gets to the candle and it'll burn better. Amar Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel ignored the instruction of the Chachamim, and he read Friday night, learned his Gemara, L'Oyer HaNeir. And I was so involved in my learning, says Rabbi Shmuel, that by mistake, naturally, as a reflex action, put my hand out to the candle, and I turned the Neir so that the oil made its way to the wick, and it burnt better. And then I realized, I did a malacha d'oraisa. What did Rabbi Shmuel do? Firstly, I said, Gedolim divrei chachamim. My gedolim divrei chachamim, how clever the chachamim were, who said they're not allowed to read L'Oyer HaNeir. Number one. What did I do now? B'shoygeg, says Rabbi Shmuel, I was mechal Shabbos. If you're mechal Shabbos b'shoygeg, you need to bring korban chatas. But we don't live in the days of the Beis Hamikdash. Says Rabbi Shmuel, I wrote in my book, Kotavti Pepinkossi, I wrote in my book that I was over b'shoygeg on a chiyuv chorus, and I owe a korban chatos to the Beis Hamikdash. The k'shiyabana Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash will be built, Avi, I will bring a korban chatos shmeina, a big chatos I'm going to bring because I was over on an issa d'oraisa with a chiyuv of chatos. Fractosis in Yevamos, how can the Gemara suggest that perhaps Rabbi Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yossi, Havara is Lalav Yotzis? If Havara is Lalav Yotzis, then it means that when you make a fire on Shabbos, you did only a lav. If it's only a lav, then there's no chiyuv misa, there's no chorus, there's no korban chatos. And Rabbi Shmuel himself says specifically, explicitly, that I was over on Havara. because I brought the oil closer to the wick, and I wrote, I'm going to bring a chatos shmeino, which means I was over one of lamates malachos. That's Tosis Kash. Yevomas vavamabis. Says the Tosis Rosh on the spot. Could be Rabbi Shmuel holds that when you make a fire, havara lelav yotzes. So why did he say that he needs to bring a chatos shmeino? He wasn't over. He doesn't need to bring a chatos for making a fire. But he does need to bring a chatos for cooking. What did he cook? He cooked the oil. He brought the oil to the wick. It gets heated up. True that after heating up, it disappears from the world, but that's still called mavashal. So when it comes to a question of making a fire, Rabbi Shmuel might hold that Rabbi Yossi it's only allowed. But when you actually bring the oil to the fire, then you're heating it up, cooking it up as well. Cooking needs a carbon chatos. What do we see from Tosei Rosh? That when you cook and it disappears from the world, that's also called bishul. It's called bishul in Shabbos. So fair enough. Mishmura says it's called bishul in basar v'chalav. It's called bishul when you cooked up the basar v'chalav, and it's forbidden to do this with a candle like this. Brilliant. However, there's a kasha here. The Chai Adam, in his Sefer Nishmas Adam, very nice. It's a nice Tosei Rosh and Yevamos, which Chai Adam probably didn't even have the Tosei Rosh. But he brings a Rashi in Shabbos Ayin Daled Amud Beis, which seems to argue. Rashi says here in Shabbos Ayin Daled Amud Beis. The Gemara says, "Hi man, a person who threw in the shoda sichsa is chayav on Shabbos." What did he do, says Rashi? Shehishlich yoseid lach. He threw in a wet piece of wood, letanor cham, into a hot oven. I would stop there. What happens to wood when you put it in the fire? It heats up and it burns. Says Rashi, no, you didn't put the wood in the fire and it heats up and it burns. Leyabshoi. You put it into the fire, and the fire has the ability just to dry out the piece of wood. She'iskasha, that it should get harder, but not to burn it. Says the Chai Adam, what do we see from Rashi? When is it called Bishul if I put this wet log in the fire, and the fire is going to have the effect of heating it up, but the log will remain. But if you left it longer, or if the fire is big enough to burn the log, even though it heats it up, but if it heats up and it doesn't leave me with something heated up at the end of the day, that's not called bishul. Bishul is when you take something on Shabbos, you heat it up, and you now have a hot cup of coffee. That's bishul. But if you heat a piece of wood so far that it gets burnt out the world, that's not bishul. How can we have the Achronim saying for the Pashut that on Hanukkah this is forbidden? You're not allowed to light the candle because you're drawing out the cream and the meat, you're heating it up, you're doing a bishul basar v'chalav. And Rashi says that there's no yesod bishul on Shabbos. If you take the log and throw it in the fire, it burns. So I did the same thing with my candle on Hanukkah. How can you forbid this on Hanukkah if Rashi and Shabbos allows it? That's the Chai Adam. He doesn't discuss the Hanukkah candles, but that's the yesod of the Chai Adam. What are we going to do to for this kasha? So for this kasha, we need a very pashto yesod, which is written in the Achronim, and we'll try and get it straight. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. In Hilchos Shabbos, a keli rishon cooks anything. You heat it up, a pot on the fire. Even if you took it off, it's a keli rishon not on the fire, it's still able to cook. It cooked. Keli rishon off the fire cooked. Put something in, it's bishul. What happens if I transfer that water into the next keli? It's now called a keli sheni. I take water, which has never been cooked, and I pour this water into the Keli Sheni, which has hot water, Keli Sheni water. Says the Gemara in Shabbos Lametes and Aleph, Keli Sheni water cannot cook water. So you'll have to do that on Shabbos. There's an exception, says the Gemara. An exception called Dag Maliach. You have a very salty fish, and this salty fish, even in a Keli Sheni, is enough. It's a small little fish, it's very thin, it's very salty. Keli Sheni has the power to cook a Dag Maliach. There's two exceptions. Dag Maliach, Kulis Espanim. That's the Gemara in Shabbos Lametes. And this Gemara is gepasken in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Yud Ches, that on Shabbos, water, there's no Bishul and Keli Sheni. Dag Maliach, there is Bishul and Keli Sheni. The Shulchan Aruch brings down the Yereim. Yereim says there's a host of things, of items, which range anywhere between water and a Dag Maliach. What about all of them? We know water doesn't get cooked in a Keli Sheni. We know Dag Maliach does. Says the Sefer Yereim, Dag Maliach, a salty fish, is one of the examples of Kalei HaBishul, something which is very easy to be cooked. It will be cooked in a Keli Sheni. But everything else between water and the salty fish is questionable. It might be a Kalei HaBishul. So you've got to be machmes, says the Yereim, and be concerned with all foods other than water. Maybe the Keli Sheni is enough to cook this food. That's the Yereim, Paskin and Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Yud Ches. The Magen Avraham, I should say. Frek the Chazon Ish and Siman on Beis, he doesn't agree with this Magen Avraham and Yereim. Only Dag Maliach has the Chumrah of Keli Sheni, of Kalei HaBishul, nothing else. What's my proof? Says the Chazon Ish. Keli Sheni we find in Masechah Shabbos for Bishul on Shabbos, and we find it also in Masechah Chulin for Basar B'chalav. The Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Kuf Hey that if you put something in Keli Rishon, you're doing a Bishul of Basar B'chalav, and there's blias transferred from one to the other. You put it into a Keli Sheni. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Keli Sheni ain't a mavashal. Says the Rebbe Yehuda, if you tell me there's one exception of a salty fish, okay. The Shulchan Aruch in Yeridei didn't need to tell that to me because he's talking about basa and chalav. He's not talking about salty fish. But if you tell me that all foods are possible candidates for Kalei HaBishul, and you tell me on Shabbos I have to be machmeh in everything for Keli Sheni, then how come that in Yeridei, Siman Kuf Hey, the Shulchan Aruch himself paskins that Keli Sheni is not mavashal? Don't need to worry about Keli Sheni. If it happened by the end, don't worry about it. Elamai says the Chazon Ish, there's only one Kalei HaBishul, two. Dag Maliach, Kulis Itzman. That's the Chazon Ish opinion. But we need to femfem. What's the pshat in the Yereim and the Magen Avraham, who are machmeh in Hilchos Shabbos, that all things are possible Kalei HaBishul, and there's no mention of such a thing in Yeridei, Siman Kuf Hey, in Basar B'chalav. Says the Meir, I'm going to bring the Meir in Siman Kuf Nun Zayin. Says the Meir, you can't compare Bishul on Shabbos, Bishul Basar B'chalav. Bishul Basar B'chalav, the Torah says Lois Tevashel, and it means something termed in Torah language Bishul. Torah language Bishul means either on the fire or in the Keli Rishon when you took it off the fire. Keli Sheni is not called Bishul. But, says the Meir, the Lametes Malachos, one of the Lametes Malachos is Melechus Mevashel. Mevashel doesn't mean that I did something called Bishul. Mevashel means that I took the Samamonim in the Midbar, I used heat to bring about an effect of Bishul. If the food or the dye that I'm dealing with is changed and has the effect of Bishul, that's called I did Bishul. What determines Bishul and Hilchos Shabbos? Did I have a food which was changed from not being mevushal to mevushal? That is the malacha of Bishul on Shabbos. That's the maril. If Keli Sheni has an effect of Bishul on the food, even though the Keli Sheni itself technically is not called a mevashal, in Bosa B'chalav, says the Maril, you need an official mevashal, like a Keli Rishon. If it's a Keli Sheni, that's not called Bishul. But in Hilchos Shabbos, if you had the effect of Bishul, you've done Melechas Bishul. That's the yesod of the Maril Kuf Nun Zayin, to differentiate between Bosa B'chalav and Hilchos Shabbos Bishul. Now we go back to the Kasha. Rashi says in Shabbos, in Ayin Daled Beis, that when are you over in Bishul on Shabbos? If you threw the log into the fire and it hardens, but if it burns, there's no Bishul on Shabbos. Says the Chayyim, what do we learn from this? That Melechas Bishul is only if you're left with a food or a piece of wood which is still in the world. If you burned it out of existence, that's not called Bishul. Rashi Shabbos Ayin Daled Amud Beis. If so, how could it be that the Mishnah Brura, the Eli Rabbah, the Shvus Yankir, the Achronim, Sefer Dava Pasha, that a candle which contains Bosa B'chalav, you're not allowed to light the candle because you're heating up and you're cooking the Bosa B'chalav, and the Torah says, if Rashi says that that's not called the Malacha of Bishul on Shabbos, says the Chasam Sofer in Yerideh Siman Tzadik Beis, Tifem for this Kasha, says the Chasam Sofer, the same Yesod as the Maru. There's a difference between Bishul of Shabbos and Bishul of Bosa B'chalav. Bishul of Bosa B'chalav is a question, a true altruistic question. Did you do Bishul? Says the Mishnah Brura, I did Bishul. I heated up the Bosa B'chalav in the candle. That's called Bishul. What happened afterwards is immaterial. It doesn't make any difference to me. You did a Bishul. But the Malach of Bishul on Shabbos has a Chumrah that you're even a Keli Sheni, if it's a Kalei Bishul. What does that Chumrah tell you? That the Malach of Bishul is to use heat to affect a change of Bishul in a food. That's the definition of Bishul on Shabbos. If so, says Rashi in Shabbos Ayin Daled Amud Beis, that's only if you're left with a food or a piece of wood, which is mevushal. But if you burned it out of existence, you might have done a Bishul of Bosa B'chalav, but you haven't done a Bishul on Shabbos. Meir, gewaltig. So we have the Reim who holds of this difference between Shabbos and Bosa B'chalav. We have the Ma'aril who explains the Shitta of the Yereim. And we have Rashi. Rashi who agrees to the Mishnah Brura that in Hilchos Bosa B'chalav it's called a Bishul even though it disappears from the world. And nevertheless on Shabbos, says Rashi, you won't be over. Because Bishul on Shabbos is bringing about that change of Mavushal, not whether you did a real Maisa of Bishul. Let's continue. We saw before that the Rosh argues. The Rosh in Toisa Rosh in Yevamos in Davavam Beis says that when Rabbi Shmuel wrote in his book that he's going to bring a Chatos Shemena, Melechas Mavi, or making a fire, doesn't carry a Chi of Chatos. So why is he Chayav a Chatos? Because he did a different Malacha of Bishul. He heated up the oil, it disappeared from the world, he did a Melechas Bishul. Rashi will argue, no doubt about it. So what does the Rosh hold? Evidently the Rosh holds that the Geder, the definition of Bishul and Shabbos, is no different than Kol HaTorah Kula. Did I do something called a Maisa Bishul? In the eyes of the Torah, is there a Maisa Bishul? In Bosa B'chalav, the Mishnah Brura says it's called a Bishul. If you heat it up and it disappears from the world, it's called a Bishul. Rashi holds Shabbos is different. Rashi holds in Shabbos, it's dependent on the chayfetz. But the Rosh holds no. There's no difference between Basar B'cholav and Shabbos. And if by Basar B'cholav the Mishnah Berurah says that you're over on Bishul when you heat it up and it disappears from the world, says the Rosh, that Rabbi Shmuel writes in his book that he's chayav a korban chatos. What did he do? He did Bishul on the oil because he heated it up and it disappeared from the world. So the Rosh doesn't differentiate between Shabbos and the rest of the Torah because it holds the Malach on Shabbos is a true Maisa Bishul. Rashi is the one who holds that if you affect a change in a food, that's called Bishul in Shabbos. Now Meir Rabbi Sai, we're in a position to explain another Machlokes, Rashi and the Rosh. The Gemara in Shabbos Yud Ches Amud Beis is discussing about a pot, and it's unclear whether the pot is a Keli Rishon or Keli Sheni. And the Gemara says, "V'dilma v'neichos shemo megis." This man might stir the pot, and evidently he's doing a malacha if he stirred the pot. Rashi learns that we're talking about a pot of food which has already been cooked to the level of ma'achol ben drusoi. It's already roy lachila b'shas adchak. There's machlokes. Is that called a third cooked, a half cooked? But it's edible. Nevertheless, says Rashi, if there's a pot on the fire, which is b'diavad edible, passable, edible, but then I take a spoon and I stir it, and by stirring it, it cooks more, and it becomes better, says Rashi, that's called the Malacha D'Oraisa of Bishul. The Rosh, in Perek Kira later, asks on Rashi, I don't understand. In dinim of Bishul of the Torah, once something has arrived at the stage of Machal Ben Drusoi, I took it from raw to being half-cooked, that's called Mavushal in dinim of the Torah. So the guy who took something raw and he made it cooked, half-cooked, he did a Bishul. But if it's already half-cooked and I stirred it and I made it more Mavushal, that's nothing. You didn't do a malacha. That's the opinion of the Rosh. The Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Yud Ches writes explicitly like Shittas Rashi. If you take food which is already cooked, machal ben drusoi, and you stir it or in any other way encourage it to become more cooked, you've done a malacha of Bishul. Says the Bir Halacha that you should know that the Rosh argues. So what's this machlokes Rashi and the Rosh? Tvarim nefloim b'yoser. In Kol HaTorah Kula, machal ben drusoi is called cooked. So the Rosh holds that Bishul on Shabbos is no different than Bishul of Basar B'cholav and Bishul of Stam Yenom and all other Bishulim. Once you get to machal ben drusoi, it's called cooked. So the Rosh says, the same way that the Rosh holds in the Toises HaRosh, that it is called Bishul when it disappears from the world, because in Kol HaTorah Kula it's called that way. So too, once you've hit Machal Ben Drusoi, in Kol HaTorah Kula there's no Bishul after Machal Ben Drusoi. So there's no Bishul on Shabbos, says the Rosh, after Machal Ben Drusoi. What about Rashi? Rashi is the L'Shitosoi. Rashi in Shabbos, Ayin Daled Amud Beis told us that if you cooked something up on Shabbos and it disappeared from the world, you haven't done Bishul on Shabbos. You have done Bishul in Basar B'cholav, says the Mishnah Berurah, but you haven't done Bishul of Shabbos. Why? Because Bishul of Shabbos is measured by the effect that you had on the food. So if the food disappeared, it was burnt out the world, there's no Malacha of Bishul. Says Rashi in Shabbos Yud Ches Amud Beis, if you take a pot, it's already cooked, Kamachal Ben Drusoi. In the dinim of Kol HaTorah Kula, it's already called cooked. In Basar B'cholav, it's called cooked. But on Shabbos, if you stir it and you bring it closer to fully cooked, you've done a malacha on Shabbos. You know why? Because on Shabbos, according to Rashi, it's measured by the food. Did you make a change in the food? You made a change in the food. You done a malacha of Bishul. You didn't make a change in the food because it burnt. You haven't done a malacha of Bishul. So Rashi l'shetosai and the Rosh l'shetosai. Unfortunately, we haven't got time for it, but this can be proven. This shitta of Rashi from the Ramah and Yeridea, that in Bosa B'chalav, he's not worried for after it's already Machal Ben Rusoi. Rashi's Chumrah is a Chumrah in Hilchos Shabbos. Let's move on, what Rabbi say.
I think we did discuss. I learned Ramah at the Ilam, so if you want to mention it, it would
You
be
did
okay.
discuss the Ramah?
Yes, I mentioned
Reb Shlomo, do you mind if I miss it out because I've only got another 10 minutes?
Yes, do it
With your kind
however
permission.
you
Put it
want.
in the Rabbi say. The Chaye Odom says a Meir de Chiddush in Hilchos Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah brings this Chiddush. Before the Chaye Odom, I want to say a story. There was one of the Heilige Rebbes called Rav Ron from Chechnov. Rav Ron from Chechnov had a visit by his son. His son was called Reb Wolf from Porisov. Two great Rebbes. And they sit down together to drink a cup of coffee. Reb Ron Chechnov, the father, takes a sip of his cup of coffee. And he indicates to his son, Reb Wolf Porisov, take a sip. Takes a little sip. He says, Oy vey, Tata, se kochzach. It's boiling hot. Kochzach translates in Yiddish as Bishul, burning. It's cooking. It's cooking hot. Se kochzach. His father said to him, Wolf, wie kannst du sagen as Sach? How can you say from your mouth that this coffee is cooking? The Gemara says, Keli, Sheni, Einoi Mavashal. It's not kochzach. You could say it's hot. You could say you can't drink it. But how can you say kochzach? It's cooking. It's not cooking. The Gemara says Keli, Sheni, Einoi Mavashal. That's the end of the story, and it's printed all over. That's what Rav Ron Chechnov told off his son. Now I want to ask you a kasha on that story. And the kasha from a Mefurish Mishnah Berurah and a Mefurish Rambam. Keli Sheni Einem Avashal. Says the Mishnah Berurah B'Shem L'Chai Adam. Normally, when you transfer things from the fire, you move it off, you transfer it from the first keli into the second keli. Keli Sheni, regularly, normally Einem Avashal. But if you did this very fast, took it off the fire and immediately poured it over, and it's not just Yad Seleres boy that you withdraw your hand, but it's Yad Nichvis boy. It's almost at the boiling point. Says the Chai Adam, that then even a Keli Sheni is Mavashal on Shabbos. This is a new concept called Yad Nichvis boy. The hand burns. And if the hand burns, even in a Keli Sheni is Mavashal. So I have a kasha. If this is Paskin in the Chai Adam, and it's Paskin in the Mishnah Berurah, what was the Groise Aveira of Wolf Porisov? He says Kochzach. It says in the Mishnah Berurah it's a Kochzach. Whatever Rabbi say. HaRav Vosna and Shevet HaLevi and a host of Achronim ask a kasha. How can the Mishnah Berurah and the Chai Adam be machmir in Hilchos Shabbos that a Keli Sheni, even if Keli Sheni is not mavashal water, but if it's Yad Nichvis boy, if the hand mamash gets scalded with it, then he's going to be called Bishul on Shabbos in Siman Shin Yud Ches. Frekt the Shevet HaLevi. It says in Yeridea Siman Kuf Hey in Shulchan Aruch. There's a Keli Rishon which cooks, and there's a Keli Sheni which doesn't cook. And the Beis Yosef writes explicitly in Siman Kuf Hey, even if the Keli Sheni is at the same temperature as the Keli Rishon, nevertheless, Keli Rishon does cook, and Keli Sheni doesn't cook. So it's Mefurish in the Beis Yosef that Keli Sheni doesn't cook, even if it's Yad Nichvis boy. So what sort of mice is this? That the Chai Adam and the Mishnah Berurah machmir in Yad Nichvis boy? Teretz is as follows. Chai Adam came from a Meir. He brings a Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos, Perchav Beis Halachah, and the Rambam says an ambati. You have a great big bath full of boiling, bubbling hot water. There's so much of it, it gets so hot. Says the Rambam, when you transfer it to a Keli Sheni, it's still so hot, it's going to be mavashal in Hilchos Shabbos. What did the Beis Yosef say? In Hilchos Bishul, Bosa B'chalav, Keli Sheni, Eine mavashal. Even Yad Nichvis boy. Why? Because Basar B'chalav is measured by true Bishul. True Bishul is only possible in a Keli Rishon. Says the Rambam, he holds like the Maril and like Rashi, that there's a difference between Shabbos and Basar B'chalav. Hilchos Shabbos, if you use heat to create a change in food, and that change is significant, that's called Bishul. So we had one example before called Kalei Bishul, and they'll get cooked even in a Keli Sheni, which is Yad Sededes boy. Says the Rambam, another exception. If you put Keli Sheni on Shabbos into a Yad Nichvis boy, it's so hot, it has the effect of a Bishul. If it has the effect of a Bishul, I don't care whether it's really called Bishul in the rest of the Torah. You've done a Bishul of Shabbos. We go back to Rabbi Avram Chechnov. If his son would have said, Sikochtzach in Shabbos, maybe he would have let him get away with it. But he said, Sikochtzach. That means that you hold in true language, it's called cooking. No, it says in Bis Yosef, however hot it is, that's not called cooking in Kol HaTorah Kula. Only in the Shabbos, a Chumrah. With the same, if we've established correctly the opinion of the Maril and Rashi and the Rambam to differentiate between Shabbos and Kol HaTorah Kula, then we can move on to understand another Rambam. The Rambam tells us in Hilchos Shabbos, Hamavashal b'chamei Tveria, you use the hot water that comes out of the ground in Chamei Tveria, that's not called Bishul in Shabbos. However, the Rambam himself, Hilchos Macholas Asuros, says that if you cook in Chamei Tveria, meat and milk, says the Rambam, ain't loikin olav. There's no malchus. Says the Maggid Mishnah, what does it mean, no malchus? Doesn't sound like it's mutter. The Rambam holds it's a sofek deraisa. There's Yerushalmi has a sofek, whether cooking basar v'cholav in Chamei Tveria is called cooking or not cooking. So therefore, ain't loikin olav. It's asa mishum sofek deraisa, but ain't loikin olav. The Maggid Mishnah, so why did the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos decide that you're not chayev if you cooked in Chamei Tveria? The teretz is Rambam l'shetosai. What did we see by the Rambam? That Hilchos Shabbos is different. If your water is boiling hot in an ambati, which the Rambam says mechamam on harba, so you might not be called bishul in a keli sheni by basar b'chalav, but it has the desired effect in Shabbos. That's called a bishul. Chamei Tveria, the Achronim tell us, doesn't create the same change to the food as regular hot water. So in Hilchos Shabbos, if you don't have the same effect, then that's not called Bishul on Shabbos. But in Bishul Basar B'chalav, nobody cares about the effect. Bishul Basar B'chalav is a question in true terms. Is this termed by the Torah Bishul or not? Says Yerushalmi, it's a sofek. It might, yes, be a Bishul in true terms. Says the Rambam, that it's Asa Mishum Sofek Deraisa in Basar B'chalav. Only in Hilchos Shabbos, which is measured according to the Rambam and Rashi and Maril, they all argue on the Rosh, and they hold that Shabbos is different. Says the Rambam, by token of the fact that the Rambam holds that Nambati is called Bishul on Shabbos, the same Rambam tells us that Bishul in Chamei Tveria is not called Bishul on Shabbos. Meir I would have liked to be Meir more in Shittas Rashi and bring some more ayahs and learn the Noid of Yehuda, who has another Rambam in Kovush. The Rambam is mechalek between Shabbos and Kol HaTorah Kula, and it's again the Rambam Meshatosai. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. The Rebbeinu should bench each and every one of us. Lishmer v'la'asos, kol mi sheyeshnoi b'shomer, yeshnoi b'zocher should be included in the great brachas of Shabbos, and the bracha of Shabbos, of Eshmer Shabbos, should be chal for each and every one of us and for all of Klal Yisrael. Ki Eshmer Shabbos, Keli Yishmereni, Birkas Hashem, Hi Ta'ashir, with lots of atzlach.